Putin made great play of, allegedly taking Bakhmut, that town that there'd been so much fighting over. What do the Ukrainians do? They just go back on the attack, and they attack around the flanks of Bakhmut because they're trying to make clear to everybody that the initiative is theirs.
Welcome to Major General Rupert Jones, then, retired standing Joint Force Commander. Rupert, good to have you here.
Good evening, John.
Rupert, can I get some of your thoughts on an interesting line of a discussion which is running in the German media, where it is said that Germans are disappointed with the Ukrainian military for, they say, not using their German training and their training in tactics and the weaponry they've been supplied with to full effect. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting article, isn't it? And I suppose the first thing I would say is it's not unreasonable that Germany and indeed other nations who are supporting the Ukrainians have an internal discussion within their ministries of defence and in their governments about the war. It is unfortunate if that has been leaked into the media, because these discussions, they're professional discussions that should happen, and they should inform the training of Ukrainians. They should inform, in this case, Germany's ongoing debate with Ukraine. All of that said, it feels it's an unfortunate line, I think, because no matter what, the reality is it's the Ukrainians who are doing the fighting, and we should respect them. They're fighting on our behalf, and they must fight their way. They're the ones on the front line, and yes, of course, they'll take on board the training that Germany and other nations give them. But just possible that our doctrine isn't right for the Ukrainian battlefield. So it's not unreasonable that they adapt those tactics.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what's happening here, because the complaints seems to be on the German side that Ukrainian forces are fighting in small units. They're not concentrating their numbers to greatest effect or their firepower. We do hear and read about the Ukrainians relying on small units to wage their war.
We do, absolutely right. And of course, there's a number of reasons why they are doing that. Conventional wisdom would say you concentrate your force and you try and break through the Russian lines. And that is typically, but not always, the most effective tactic. But what we have to remember is the Ukrainians are trying to do Western combined arms maneuver, bringing all the tools of war together. But they're doing it, frankly, with one hand tied behind their back. And that hand is they haven't got air power. And that is typically a key enabler. The other thing is, they are really trying to minimize their casualties. And they have demonstrated pretty well over the last year or so that they can make gains at relatively low cost compared with the Russians. And so I think we just kind of need to cut them a little bit of slack here. They're doing an incredibly hard job. They're up against very well prepared Russian defenses. And if they have judged, look, gentle probing attacks with small numbers is more effective, then I think we have to defer to them. Of course, we would expect Western militaries to continue to mentor them behind the scenes. But ultimately, it's a Ukrainian fight, and we should be a little bit cautious of being too judgmental.
Yeah, the Ukrainian military are outnumbered by what is still a mighty Russian force, but the Ukrainians have had a good deal of help with equipment and with arms, with munitions and ammunition from allies like us. Who is the better armed combatant on the battlefield now, Rupert?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, isn't it? The military with the better Western equipment or the better modern equipment is undoubtedly the Ukrainians. But despite the great generosity of Western nations, they haven't got vast amounts of it. So they're still having to husband it very carefully. They're still using quite a lot of their own pre-war and Soviet era equipment, but the top end equipment is with the Ukrainians. But of course, the Russians, they've got some good equipment too. They've been bringing in Iranian drones, as we know. So there's not huge asymmetry in terms of the technology that's available to the two sides.
What is your assessment then, finally, Rupert, on the progress of the Ukrainian counter-offensive? We know it's been slower and harder than some people may have anticipated, but how do you rate it?
Yeah, look, the reality is we commentators, the general public, the taxpayer, the people who are feeling the impact of the war on their cost of living at home, we would all wish for that offensive to go faster than it is. But again, I don't think we should be too judgmental about that. The reality is it is incredibly hard what the Ukrainians are doing. They continue to make slow but steady progress. And for as long as they're committed to it and they're not concerned, then I think we should keep the faith, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, slow progress is still progress, and surely it's difficult for the Russians to see themselves or to pick themselves back home in Russia as anything other than a force on the back foot now.
I think that's absolutely right. I completely agree with that, John. The momentum does lie with the Ukrainians. You'll recall a few months ago, the Russians, Putin made great play of, allegedly taking Bakhmut, that town that there'd been so much fighting over. What do the Ukrainians do? They just go back on the attack and they attack around the flanks of Bakhmut because they're trying to make clear to everybody that the initiative is theirs. And the Russians, we should also remember that the Russians aren't doing nothing. They are in other parts of the front are attacking the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians are having to both defend and attack. Their attacks are proving much more successful than the Russians, but clearly would like them to make even greater progress.
Okay, Rupert, really great to get your thoughts in our briefing room. As always, that's Major General Rupert Jones there with his thoughts on the current state of the war in Ukraine.